Hello, and welcome again to the podcast of Wednesday's Child. Let me start by wishing you a very, very happy new year. It's 2024. You've had a bit of a breather from myself, Deborah Watson, and my co host, Sarah Ledger, who've been with you over thick and thin over the last few years. We kick-started this podcast in the COVID times, which seems a distant memory in many respects now. But here, as we enter 2024, we're really shoving in the momentum. We're back to hold your hand through the eating disorder recovery journey, whether you be somebody that's going through that yourself or someone who is supporting a loved one. So, we're going to start this year with what you'd probably anticipate would be a fairly typical New Year episode, which is giving you some tips, momentum, and insight into what we have realized, recognized, and managed to hold on to in our own recovery journey through what we've been through. So, without further ado, I am going to reintroduce you to Sarah Ledger. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. How's tricks?
Yeah, all good with me. Thank you very much. Very, very happy new year. We have had a bit of a pause, haven't we? We certainly did take a little bit more time out over 2023, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think certainly in your eating disorder recovery journey, I think you and I have had personal conversations that sometimes you have to remind yourself when you feel too entrenched in the conversation. Does that sound fair? And every now and then you have to put your head up and say, maybe I need to step outside of this, either because I'm not dealing with my own past as well as I was, or because something's making me feel a little bit more vulnerable, or just because life has got so good and so exciting that it's getting in the way and I just don't have time to think about my history. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, I think one of the differences with the Wednesday's Child podcast is that everybody that we have on and us ourselves have lived experience. So therefore, you've always got one eye on supporting the community and one eye on making sure that you're protecting yourself, your loved ones, and obviously each other, Debbie. I know you and I talk a lot off screen and off podcast about our own journeys personally, because that's the bit that we get support from each other from in order to then be able to then empower and support other people. And also, like you said, when you get through recovery, you start to find out that like life isn't just all about that eating disorder, and other things will pop up and other things you'll want to follow and you want to do. And I know this year for me there was a lot of reflection going on, and I've been doing actually quite recently. I don't know why, but sometimes you don't have to figure out why, do you? Kind of lots of reflection about the different stages that you go through. And obviously sometimes when you're doing things like we're doing the Wednesday's Child to support people, you have to talk about all those different stages. And then some people be thinking, oh, but what about my bit of recovery? What about my bit of recovery? And it can be quite tricksy to sort of figure out what it is that is going to help people the most. So having a break, I think, is always actually a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what we'll say at the top of the year is that our intention is very much to be with you on a more regular basis in the 12 months that follows. And with that, we're sort of hoping we will be back with you around once a fortnight. We're not going to state what day it's going to drop into your feed, but for those of you that like to listen to our dulcet tones over the airwaves, I'm sure you'll kind of drop in and you'll find us regularly. But something that I was just reflecting off camera to you about, Sarah, as well, is the number of messages I get from people who say they keep dipping back in our past conversations, and it's almost like they're digging those chats out for their own toolkit purposes in their recovery. So even though we haven't constantly been refreshing and adding new episodes over recent months, actually we do know that catalogue of past episodes is still continuing to prove helpful. So I would say to anybody, whether you're a new listener or someone who's been with us since 2020, just dip back, just have a little kind of fumble around and see what conversations we've talked about, which guests we've spoken to, and see if something resonates for you. I'm sure you will find in the coming year there will be things that Sarah and I will talk about more this year that perhaps we might not have done 3 years ago. So you talk about that kind of age and stage that you're at, Sarah, and for you and I, we're both ladies of a certain age now. So
I
we've
know.
we've both just kind of I don't know, just collided into mid-40s. And hence that brings all sorts of things, particularly around perimenopause and menopause and aspects of our health that sit outside of our eating disorder, but can also remind you of your eating disorder. So the natural thing around hormonal changes, weight change, and things that, just it can, I don't know how you feel about that, Sarah, but certainly it has taught me new things, or was a bit of a, oh, that was unexpected, what that did for me, being diagnosed with this, reaching this stage of my life.
Yeah, for me, it's a one where there's like kind of the constant conversation, and therefore then challenge and work of what I had to do in order to recover is almost sometimes feeling like it has to be the reverse when you start to hit the menopause. And it's sort of, well, I learned those skills. I did that toolkit. Yeah, anyone listening knows that you and I did. We love our toolkit. We used the toolkit. We did what we needed to do, and now suddenly that toolkit is not defunct, but it needs to be different.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of like, okay, but if I can I trust myself? Yes, of course I can trust myself. I'll always have trust in myself. But if I change this, if I do that, if I don't do that, oh, what could that happen? And I think that's the bit, and that for me is the bit that I've been reflecting on a lot these last 6 months, is this kind of part of recovery that never seems to get talked about where you've done like the hard graft, you've gone through the first few years of that, the trauma that it creates, and then you're in that kind of where it starts to maybe come back to you when you're asleep, and or you might just spot someone and it reminds you of something, and you're not entrenched in your eating disorder, but there is still something in your head that is alert to certain things. And I think you did right when you hit 46. I'm 46 this year, and things naturally start to happen. It is going to, and it does sort of start to raise some questions that you thought you'd maybe quashed some time back.
Yeah, and perhaps also it brings into play certain conversations. So your peer group begin to talk about weight changes, dietary behaviors, how they're feeling and thinking about themselves. And some of those things that haven't really been part of your psyche for a while, you haven't maybe even, if you've been in a good state of health, you haven't necessarily been constantly thinking about diet and weight. All of a sudden, women of a certain age are around you talking about what they're doing or how they're managing the fact that their body is changing, their weight is changing. And I think there's just sort of things for me that I have almost been a little bit surprised about, and yeah, just kind of grateful that I've had that early stage foundation toolkit to go back to and say,
Yeah,
do you know what, I'm going to need to pull this out the bag a bit,
yeah.
just as if you were a 25-year-old kind of comparing yourself to a peer. And so I do think all the same things apply, but maybe in a different way
Yeah.
sometimes.
And that's like you said, that's why it's really great when people are going back through things like the podcasts and the Wednesday's Child social media feed and anywhere else that you get support from. You should be using it like you would an encyclopedia, or you look at the index, you find the bit that you're
The
after, and then you
reference
go
book
to that.
after all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you go back to that section. The fact that I might look 4 years younger is that's beside the point. The process,
Oh,
the
what,
advice, the
Sarah?
strategy.
We aging? I thought we were the Peter Pan of podcasts. Don't try saying that early in the morning.
And say
Bit of
I'm not going to
alliteration.
try.
Okay, so given this is our kickoff for the start of 2024, I just thought very, very briefly, we'll jump into people's feeds and we'll give them a few kind of insights and tips around what we find is particularly helpful at this time of year when people are talking maybe about resolutions, diet, changing in behavior, and some of that kind of sense of positivity. For me, I just want to start by saying the number one thing I feel the need to remind myself at the start of every year is January 1st makes absolutely no difference. So you can start a new page any day of the week. You can like any day of the week, the month, the year. So it really, this January the 1st thing and how this has become so entrenched in resolutions, I think, we kind of need to forget that. But even bigger than that is the constant mantra that you must take forward with you of whatever behavior, resolution, or commitment I choose to make for myself in the 12 months. I need to ask myself, what do I want my life to look like in the year to come? Because if the behaviors and patterns and commitments or likely resolutions you are inclined toward for this year are ones that could prevent you from having the fuller, wholesome, healthy, happy year that you might desire, then everything about that says to me that it's the wrong kind of commitment, whatever that relates to, whether it's relationships, your body, your dietary consumption, your exercise level. You should be looking forward and saying, 12 months from now, what has this year looked like for me?
I think that's I pause then because I can't speak. Sorry. Look, you've taken all my words away.
Oh,
No, I pause then because actually what you just said there is so important and so crucial at any point of year. And actually, if we think about that idea of what resolution actually means, it's actually about putting things into their component parts again. It's actually about looking again at how things are made up and how, you and I are wordsmiths, Debbie. And so resolution is literally breaking something into parts. So if we think of that to do with life and how your life, the whole point is for life to get better, and therefore then eating disorder recovery, it's about breaking down this massive thing that is eating disorder recovery that can be so overwhelming if you think about it as its whole, and breaking it down at this time of year or any time of year into its component parts, because those each small bits that sometimes might only be recognizable to you, other people might not know that they're occurring in your eating disorder, all those more obvious things that are happening with in your illness. Each of those small component parts is doable, is manageable as a small component part. So even if, because I'm with you, Debbie, I happened to start my real recovery in January the 1st, just because I just got pig sick, as everybody who's listened to me a million times would hear. But it doesn't matter about the date. It's about thinking about not the whole thing. I'm going to tackle eating disorder recovery today. It's about which little bite-sized chunks, pardon the pun, are going to be dealt with, and then how you're going to then deal with each of those, and then how you're going to help that move on to the next piece and the next piece and the next piece.
yeah. I remember, I mean, only sort of, I think 2 years ago, I broke my leg, and I can remember the physio saying, it's not about thinking that, when am I going to be able to walk a mile? It's about thinking, can I walk to the end of this hospital corridor
Yeah.
today? And really, that is what recovery looks like in its simplistic, sensible version, because we know if we jump to kind of some extreme element of that and promise ourselves the earth, that actually makes things overwhelming and less attainable.
Yeah. And every day you wake up, and this is one of the reasons why I do think it is tiring, but it's the only way out is through. People, again, you've heard us say that a million times, is every single day. It's like that Robert Frost poem. You've got two paths that you can choose. You either make a decision that takes you closer to your eating disorder, or a decision that takes you closer to recovery. So if you are in recovery, then every single day you have to commit to making positive actions and steps towards recovery, regardless of how tiny in the moment they might feel.
Yeah.
Over time, like any beach, those tiny little granulars of sand over time will create something beautiful and something long lasting and something you want to live on for the rest of your life. If you choose to the eating disorder decisions, then nothing is going to change. You are going to be stuck and you are going to be poorly. But
Or
that's
in
what makes
fact,
it tiring.
I would argue things do change, but they change only for the worse,
Worse,
because
yeah.
what continues to happen each time you choose the eating disorder is you further isolate. You lose one more friend, you lose
Yeah.
one more opportunity, you become, older earlier, you lose your sense of self. So you do lose by choosing the eating disorder over the healthier, happier option each time, albeit we all know, and Sarah and I can attest to this, it's the scariest choice. The choice of moving away from your eating disorder and to pick up, the healthier or the more sensible option from the fridge, or to choose to go out for dinner with friends rather than staying in your pajamas because you're scared to go out and eat, or to say yes to a social occasion, to I don't know, to say yes to a scary food, a fear food that you've not had for a long time. It's those things that are the bricks in the wall that build your recovery.
Yeah.
They hurt like hell, they scare you, but scary's good. And if you're not being scared by change, and this all sounds so trite because these are so many sort of like little passages that you'll see around social media over these next few weeks, but really to not feel scared and to not face the fear is to not change, is to not progress.
And
And
that
that's
that
scary.
fear is not just about eating disorders. You know, every single day I'm afraid of something and I'm recovered. And I'm afraid of something because I run a company. I'm afraid of something because I'm a mum. I'm afraid of something because I live in the northeast of England. I'm afraid of something because I've got three spaniels and I'm stupid because I've got three spaniels. I'm afraid of something because I'm having building work done. And at any point, you know, those fears aren't, they're not all encompassing and they don't overwhelm, but they're real. They're challenges every single day that everybody always has to face. But when you are feeling stronger, when you are less occupied and preoccupied with the illness, those fears, those day-to-day life challenges are so much easier to deal with because you're in the moment, your brain's not foggy, and you can crack on with things.
And the healthier you become in your brain and in your body, the more you start to admire yourself and appreciate how far you've come. It's only in that early scary time when you're stepping off that diving board, when you can't even see how major it is that you are making these better decisions. You know, we all know that we've talked about on the podcast so many times, you know, it's not just nutritional rehabilitation, it's about neural rewiring as well. And in that early phase when our brain isn't still working yet as well as it should, so we can't cognitively see that it's worth the pain, it's worth the fear. We just feel this sense of, I don't want to bloody eat. I don't want to change. I don't want to have to, you know, get out of my turgid, awful routine. When we're stuck like that, even our brain isn't firing on all cylinders to be able to turn around and remind us that we're doing it for the greater good. We might hear it from friends and family who are desperately, you know, trying to see us well, but ultimately we're still stuck so far down, you know, this terrible tunnel that we can't climb out. But as you get more nutritionally restored, as you see those little, as you say, those like granular elements, those little grains of sand coming together, you will start to see what progress you are making. And I think it's there that you then go, oh, actually, life looks a bit more sociable. Life looks a bit more rewarding. I put my head on the pillow and I've had a better day today. I spoke to someone today. I enjoyed that meal out today. I realized that the sky was this color today and I heard this happening around me. All these things that actually, when we live in the world of an eating disorder, our senses and our joy and our ability to discover and to really live in our world. And I mean live in our world, not just exist, but to live and to move forward. Our ability to do that is completely strangled when we live with an eating disorder. I've had it called to me as arrested development so many times. And I think for those of you that have been through eating disorder recovery, if you look back to when you first experienced your eating disorder, it can be very true that you remain in arrested development at the point your eating disorder started, unless you choose to recover and move on. And that's an utter tragedy, particularly for people that live with severe and enduring eating disorders that go on 10, 15, 20 years. What a waste of a life.
And like many things in life, when you want to start something. So if you're listening to this and you're either at the very, very beginning of your journey and or you've maybe coming back to recovery, focusing a little bit more strongly. Often, like anything in life, isn't it? It's the start. It's how do you actually, it's like when you're writing that essay for uni or whatever, and you got your pen in the old days or your computer,
Oh,
and you're
how
like,
many years ago was that? Ooh.
don't ask. But it's at that point, isn't it, where you're like, what the friggin' hell? What do I do again? So I think that one really helpful thing, if people are stuck in that kind of like, how do I actually get this started? It's to maybe think about a handful of, when we've called them in the past hinge behaviors.
Yeah.
So a handful of small behaviors. So an example of one of my hinge behaviors back from 2019 was weighing bread. Some small things that you can do, you can, because you've got to obviously challenge, repeat, you've got to keep committing, that you can do that have then would have a knock-on effect to others. So the reason why I chose to stop weighing bread as one of my first hinge behaviors was because I would often have toast in the morning. So if I stopped weighing bread, it meant that first thing in the morning, I wasn't going downstairs and getting a set of scales out. It meant that I was going to just take a slice of toast out of the slice of bread, sorry, out of the bread bag. I didn't have to weigh it because it was pre-sliced bread that I bought. So I can and I should trust the fact that your pre-sliced bread is pre-sliced and they're all a similar sort of size. So I didn't have to weigh it. I knew also if I got my head into not weighing bread, then that would then hinge a gateway behavior to having things like sandwiches a little less stressful, being able to maybe then go and grab a Goa sandwich at Greg's or Tesco, which might make it a little less stressful. So that one little behavior over time allowed me to start to knock on to other things. You know, a couple of other things in that same sort of guise was like not measuring milk. You don't need to measure milk to make a bowl of porridge. You can just do it by eye. And it's ridiculously challenging to start off with. It's painful. You will walk in and out of your kitchen. You will probably cry. You will open and close your bread basket and your fridge door hundreds of times in the first few weeks. But then bit by bit, if you commit every day and you make a positive action towards recovery, then those small hinge behaviors will start to have a knock-on effect to other bigger and longer lasting things.
As you say, it's just building, isn't it? Just building a brick at a time and keeping going.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful the way you kind of reference that. They just seem like small daily behaviors, but those small daily behaviors become bigger and bigger and part of bigger activities in daily life.
Yeah. And
And
I
to,
used to, I've said before, and I used to, when I committed to recovery, and I still do it now, but for different reasons, maybe just because I'm a bit of a stalker now. I used to watch people, like I didn't know, I'd lost all frame of reference as to how to actually look after myself, like many of us do when we're in eating disorder recovery. So I would sit in the local shopping centre outside the bakers and outside the butchers. I would just sit and watch my sister, my mum, and I'd be like having to relearn, watching people similar age to me doing habits, doing just going about their day and thinking, right, okay, so that's how you do that thing without having to do those 4 things beforehand. And it's that kind of that watching, just studying, just like if you were studying anything, you'd get the books out, you'd get on YouTube, you'd get on Instagram, you'd write a diary. You're going back into that kind of, you're learning how to recover every single day.
yeah, so kind of observational education, which makes such a difference. And you're right. I mean, I suppose anybody that's never been through an eating disorder would think, well, that's a bit bizarre, particularly like in your situation. You were, you were a mum and a wife by the time you succumbed to an eating disorder. So actually having to relearn at that point was a major ordeal and
Yeah.
something that you'd think, well, why would an adult ever need to do that? But it's in the same way that, I don't know, an adult might have to relearn to use their legs after a terrible accident or relearn to use their voice after a stroke. I mean, it is just about saying, I have been through utter trauma, this illness, whether you call it a physical illness or a mental illness or a mix of both, has caused me to be in this situation. And the one way I can move forward is to use all tools to my armory, all my senses, all my observational powers to bring myself through and to re-educate myself.
And you have to do it yourself for yourself. You have to observe, alter your behavior, make your plan, find your hinge behaviors by yourself, because one of the biggest challenges for eating disorder recovery is there is no magic pill. Someone cannot come along and take this away from you like they can if you've got a physical illness or an ailment. The only way out is through, and the only person that can get you through it ultimately is you, with support, with your cheerleading team, with Wednesday's Child, with anything and anywhere you can get that support from to gather your troop. But you have to commit that you are doing this for you every single day.
Yeah. I think, there's some really important sort of takeaways from that that anybody that's, whether that you're listening to this podcast for the first time or you're a long time loyal listener going into 2024 and grateful to see our name pop up in your feed again. I think that the thing is about some of the stuff that Sarah said there about the only way out is through, recognizing that, January 1st could just as easily be March the 21st. It doesn't matter what day it is. It's, keeping reminding yourself that of your observational power, your ability to witness what's happening in the world around you, to remind yourself of what you ultimately want, and to keep telling yourself that only you, despite all the support that you can gather for your eating disorder, only you can be the master of your own victory from through this journey. Is there anything else that you would be saying to someone, at this start of the year that you think is one of your most important lessons or learnings, Sarah?
There's all the things, isn't there, that folks always talk about, be kind to yourself, trust yourself, speak to those around you. But for me, it's also that you are committing to make yourself better, and you're committing every single day from the second your feet land the floor in the morning to make the right positive actions for recovery. And then at the end of the day, just give yourself some time and space in whichever medium that you have to reflect on that. So be it journaling, be it you start an Instagram page. I used to lay in the bath every single night and just kind of mull it over sometimes. In fact, if I just couldn't be bothered to, because I used to keep my journal just on my phone. If I just couldn't be bothered, I would just sit in the bath. And I think that's a really important process, because it allows you to have that conversation in your head, and it allows you to then start healing yourself, so then you can spot when you need to bat away that noisy, horrible, buzzy fly, which is the eating disorder voice. So the more that you give yourself your own voice in your own head, be it in the journal and or just like I've just said in the bath there, get used to listening to yourself, and allow yourself over time to also get angry with yourself, and because you're actually getting angry with the eating
Yeah.
disorder.
Allow yourself to use those emotions. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to let them surface.
Yeah. Get angry, shout, stamp your feet. But I think you commit from the beginning of the day, and then you do all of your actions. And at the end of the day, give yourself some time to decompress, get quiet, reflect on your day. If it's gone a bit of a shitstorm, it's gone a bit of a shitstorm. It happens. But then the next morning you wake up, you put your feet on the floor, and recovery starts. So topping and tailing your day with positive, committed actions at the beginning, and then some time to reflect and giving yourself a little bit of breathing space at the end of the day.
I think that's hugely helpful. I think the only other thing I really want to add in this episode is that we know that a good proportion of those of you that listen to this podcast will be those that aren't experiencing the eating disorder directly as somebody that is trying to recover themselves, but is a parent, a spouse, a partner, a sibling, perhaps, or even a work colleague. What I would say to you is remember what Sarah and I talk about so much about the oxygen mask. Look after yourself in order to be able to look after the one you love. That's so important. Eating disorder recovery is so challenging, but particularly for those around on the periphery who are saying, God, I just want this person to be well. And I'm saying the same thing all the time. And, we just talked there about getting angry. Oh my goodness, will you get angry? Will you get emotional? Will you feel hurt? But every day or even hour and minute you spend feeling angry or resentful or blaming yourself, the blame and the shame that we hear from some people, whether you're a parent or a partner, or just take that out of it. Allow yourself to be frustrated and angry at times, but remind yourself that there is no room for shame and blame. The ultimate task in hand is to enable this person to become well again. And you can do as much as you can do to hold their hand on their journey. And in many, many cases, your support will help that person to reach their right conclusions, hopefully travel the right path and find that recovery. But you should not either beat yourself up or become poorly yourself in the bid to try and make that person well. Because from the post bag that Wednesday's Child gets all the time, there are far too many of you living in that really dark place of thinking, will it ever change? What have I done? How is this ever going to get better for my daughter, my partner? And that is a hellish place. And we say that, on this podcast all the time, because I know what it did to my family. Sarah, as somebody that was married, had a child, there's no denying the impact it has on those around us. So if you are listening to this as somebody who's going through somewhat of a dark place and just desperately hoping 2024 will be a better hope for recovery for that person you love, then we hear you. We hope you'll keep listening and do reach out, drop us an email, let us know if there are things that we could be talking about on this podcast that would help you. And I suppose I'll close this episode with just extending the theme of that message there, which is it's really important to us that we've resurfaced into your podcast feed and that we're seeking to do so on a regular basis, but we're wanting to talk about the things that you need help with, want to hear, and feel would be helpful to you. So whether that's more guests from us, whether it's more positive stories about recovery, or whether it's cause specifics, whatever it is. And as I say, whether you are somebody going through recovery, has achieved recovery, or you're somebody loving or caring for somebody with an eating disorder, we want to hear those questions. We want to know how else we can help. And also, I don't think we do this enough. The opportunity to praise. Like if you live in a part of the country or the world which just has phenomenal eating disorder support services, and it has done wonders for you, then I am very happy for us to be a voice championing those great individuals, organizations that have helped you on the road to recovery or helped you as a family. So please make sure that 2024 is a year in which Wednesday's Child is able to be a supportive part of the toolkit for you wherever you are in an eating disorder journey, story. You can reach out anytime. Quite happy to receive your direct emails. You can email me on debbie@wednesdayschild.co.uk, and Sarah and I take a regular opportunity to chat through those. And you can have a look around on our website, which will give you a little bit of a better understanding of the other things that we do as well around educating, particularly school leaders and professionals, but businesses as well. And keep telling us what it is you want from us. So that's about it for our welcome back episode. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for dropping in for the first week of January.
Hey, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Do you have a busy week ahead?
I'm back at work. So which is both yay and oh. But yeah, but no, it's all good. But let's, like most people, busy life just starts again the second that the new year turns.
It so does. And no sooner are we kind of just getting back into it in January, we'll be talking about Christmas all over again very, very quickly.
My Amy's 15 next week, everybody. Listeners, if you're
Wow,
bothered,
my
15.
goodness.
Wow.
She
Wow.
going to GCSEs. Goodness.
Yeah, soon.
Oh my goodness. Dare I say you're getting old? No.
I
I'm
am
gonna
old,
end the
full stop.
podcast before you get really offended. Thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of the Wednesday's Child podcast. Please stay in touch, and in the meantime, focus on your recovery. Take care for now.